Good day, everyone. Welcome to Miss Valley Entertainment News. My name is Dredd. We're going to be covering a little bit more and more in-depth Larian Studios news. Now, for those of you who have absolutely no interest in Larian Studios or maybe even the gaming industry as a whole, why are you here? But hey, feel free to turn off and go watch something else. But I think more than just a look at Larian, this is a fascinating look inside a small company, a small independent company that really exploded with their last game, but really have been climbing the ladder with each successive game they've done lately in the last however long it's been. And they have a roadmap and they have a plan and they've been following it and they have been highly successful at it. And the chance to sit down and review this GameSpot video where they interview Swen Vincke of Larian Studios is quite fascinating. I've been over it myself already, just as a wanting to see it myself. And now I'd love to just kind of break it down with you. And at the end of this, we're going to go to a recent, as in like yesterday, as I'm recording this, recent article as well, where they give a little bit more indication and a little bit more fleshing out of what the future plans for Larian is. Because you think they're resting on their laurels? I don't think so. I think they are getting ready to go in after the gaming industry, all guns blazing, and I do mean that in a good way, as in they are going to do everything they can to knock your socks off with a bunch of surprises. That's my feeling anyways. So let's get into the interview and the article, cover all this. Thank you both so much for tuning in, by the way. And if you like the content, you like what you're seeing here, please consider subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell for notifications. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up and drop a comment. Love to hear what you have to think. Love to hear what you have to think. Love to hear your thoughts. How about that? We'll go with that one. So this again, this video in its original form, as well as the article afterwards, will be linked down below in the description if you want to see and or read them, hear them, whatever, without my commentary afterwards. Go ahead. Here we go. So this is a GameSpot article here on YouTube called Baldur's Gate 4 Isn't Next for Larian. Something bigger is coming.
Everyone, it is GDC 2024 here in San Francisco, which means it's Hey everyone, it is GDC 2024 here in San Francisco, which means it's been a little bit tricky to put together a traditional episode of Spot On. As you can see, Lucy is not sat next to me. She's actually out talking to people,
I don't know who Lucy is.
Seeing a few games. Instead of a normal episode, I've actually got something different this time. I sat down with Swen from Larian to talk about Baldur's Gate 3, specifically the development and the highs and lows of it. But we also talk about the future of Larian
And I think some of you who maybe don't often get to see a creator interview where they go and talk about the game that they put out that was highly successful and the highs and lows of the development. This is quite fascinating. I really do find this neat.
Baldur's Gate as a franchise. It's a really interesting chat that I hope you get a lot out of. We'll be back with a traditional episode next week, but I hope you enjoy this one until then. I'm sure you've had this question a million times now, but the success of Baldur's Gate 3, like, has it really sunk in at this point, or have you reached a point where you're like beyond that, where you're like, oh, we're winning awards and we're going to things, it's just kind of understood now?
It's an interesting one because we're a very introspective company, so we've always tried to improve ourselves as we progressed over the years.
Maybe that introspection is needed in more gaming companies nowadays. What do you think? Are a lot of gaming companies still trying to improve themselves all the time, or are they just trying to remain with the status quo and keep whatever money they've already got and try to fish some more out of you? Because that's how the gaming industry feels like. A lot of it, anyways, like 90% of it right now. I think it's a real downturn for the gaming industry, is my opinion, and it's something that successful studios, independent studios like Larian, hopefully will drive a rise of studios that do the right thing by gamers. Don't just think about the profits. They aren't stupid with money. I'm not talking about that. But, just strive to master their craft and please people. Isn't that what we want from our artists? And man, video game producers are artists. Drop down. Let me know what you think.
And so we were related, obviously,
Yeah.
by the reception. But very rapidly, we started discussing, we can do this better, we can do this better, we can do
Right.
this better. So first took a long break. And then
I've often joked about the people in the Bethesda office just busy partying about all the money they made and, hookers and blow and not really doing anything to better themselves. But I use that very flippant example with Bethesda because if you go back and you look at all their games, bug fixing has been horrible with that company. They don't fix the bugs in games or most of them, and they rely on others to do it for them, and they just basically refuse to. And that's a company that needed to take a page from the Larian books and actually try to improve your company. Be like, hey, we didn't bug fix our last game. We can't just keep relying on others to fix our mistakes. We need to own up and fix our mistakes and then eventually get to the point where we stop making those mistakes. As an example.
Now we're on something new. So
Yeah.
we just moved forward, and for us that chapter is closed. Obviously, we're doing patches and we're doing updates and so forth. But it's been nice, but there's so much stuff to do already that's overtaken it.
This is probably difficult for anyone outside of the studio to really get a comprehension of, other than looking at numbers. But the scale of its success, is it already like significantly more than your previous games? And because of that, has it pushed you into like new territory of game development where you're like encountering challenges that you never had before?
Yes. So
Easy answer, yes.
it's almost double DOS 2 now. So it's really doing really, really well because DOS 2 is very successful.
Yeah.
Twice as successful as Divinity Original
We already
Sin 2.
scaled up heavily during BG3, so that brings new challenges with it, things that we hadn't encountered before. So things that's what I meant with the introspection, things that we're struggling with, trying to figure out what's the right way of dealing with this. The biggest thing right now, and it's something that I'm actively fighting against, is fear of doing less in the next one or not doing as well. So a lot of pressure.
Hard to.
Ever since we
go up against the pass sometimes,
or Destiny in their own hands and left publishers behind. Our Metacritic has been going up, and so we're at 96 now. And so there's like we need to do better. And I said like you just got to forget about it and follow your gut feeling, right? But just don't try to perfection everything because otherwise you're not going to get anything done anymore.
And doesn't that really sound like an artist? Like you just got to forget about the scores and everything else and just go with your gut feeling because that sounds like an artist to me. That's artist talk. I like that.
Larian's been built for making big things. I mean, like our initial struggles always were because we wanted to do bigger things than the people funding us wanted us to do, and that was a source of conflict.
That's cool.
So now that we can, the problem is rather like how do we...
So they were limited a lot of times by the amount of funding they had. Like, we want to do this. And it's like, we don't have the funding for that. And we can't get the funding to be able to do this because it's going to cost so much more. So now we have to limit what we're actually doing. Interesting.
Struggles always were because we wanted to do bigger things than the people funding us wanted us to do. And that was a source of conflict. So now that we can, the problem is rather like, how do we constrain ourselves from doing too much? So it's more of a that type of management that's necessary. So, like, funnily enough, this morning I had a meeting with a whole bunch of directors, and we were saying like, guys, that's too much. Yeah, we got to scale it down a little bit because we're going to run into trouble with all the stuff that we want to change.
And all the stuff he's talking about that we want to do and that we want to change, he's probably not talking about Baldur's Gate 3 at this point. They're just doing patches, easy patches of bug fixes on Baldur's Gate 3. That's it. They're done with Baldur's Gate 3, and they're done with Wizards of the Coast, and they're done with Dungeons and Dragons. He'll reiterate that later on. They have, as studio, have moved on. They are already moving on to their next project. Now, yes, they are still doing the work on Baldur's Gate 3 in patches of bug fixes that needs to get done. They have people devoted to that, but as a studio whole, they've moved on.
There was a lot of calculation behind how we made Baldur's Gate 3. There was a plan behind it. Obviously, we were confronted with a number of things that we didn't expect that made it more problematic to as a development. So there's a balance between the two things, right? So you got to try new stuff or you're going to go become stale. And that's really not why we started doing this. At the same time, you need to build upon your strengths from the past, right, and try to improve those.
Build upon your strengths and
I think
improve
BG3
them.
was a really good example of how you took everything that we did in DOS 2 and you pushed it further, right? And you could see the big thing was we were going to bring in cinematics, but if you look.
So I like this. I like what he talks about is like, as a studio, they decided, look, we're going to take our strengths from Divinity Original Sin 2. And we're going to move those strengths into Baldur's Gate 3, which if you compare those two games, you could absolutely see that they shifted Divinity Original Sin 2, popped it into this universe over here, and then expanded it greatly. But pretty much everything that Divinity Original Sin 2 had in it, as far as game mechanics and the way things worked, ended up in Baldur's Gate 3 in some form. And he does go on, I think, a little bit later and explain that as a studio, they've been going from game to game to game doing that. They've taken their game, hey, we've got a game that worked. Okay, now let's take what we just learned there, move it to the next game, but expand and do more. Right? And then they're going to take that and are going to move to the next game. And they're going to pop it over there and expand and add more onto it. And this man actually has a plan. A set plan from when he made Larian Studios, when he founded Larian Studios, of what he wants to accomplish, what the ultimate goal is. Give you a little forewarning. He's 2 games away from his ultimate goal. And some of it is they have to learn what needs to, how it works and what needs to go in there. And some of it is technology he has to wait for. Pretty exciting stuff. But I really like the way he's not just talking about games, but he's talking about how to run and design a studio, how to plan things accurately. It's a fascinating look into the gaming stuff. I love this.
Look at all the small things. There's a lot of innovation at the level of turn-based combat. There was really a lot of innovation done there, and a lot of them were risky. We didn't know if they were going to work up front, right? And so
take risk.
Take risk, gamers. With the plans that we have right now, there's a lot of risk in there.
Right.
So we don't know if it's going to work. But then again, also if you want to be creative, you gotta be able to fail.
Artist
do you
talk.
foresee yourself following a similar development process as you did with BG3? Because it was quite unlike most other development processes, and it seems to have paid off for you in.
And again, he's saying, with your next game that you already started work on, early work, but are you going to go through the same development process you went through with Baldur's Gate 3? Because that was a unique process.
In that regard, do you want to do it that same way, or do you feel like, the next thing is going to be a bit different?
Well, I mean, my GDC talk showed the initial design, part of the initial design doc that we had to supply to Wizards of the Coast. And it said, you know what, we're just going to make Act 1. We're going to put it in early access. We're going to see what players think about it. And then we're going to make Act 2 and 3. So we'll figure it out.
That's a really neat way of doing things. I don't know if I've ever heard. I mean, maybe there's other companies who have done this before. I certainly know a lot of games come out in early access. But I don't know of any game. Can anyone name a game where they know that this is what the company behind it did? They put out Act 1 into early access. They got the feedback from the players on what is good and what isn't. They worked on Act 1 and fixing it up so it was more like what the gamers wanted. And then they started developing Act 2 and 3 to make it match kind of with Act 1. I've never heard of a company doing it quite that way before. And let's be honest, it worked.
As we go. So I think that's the same thing we did with Original Sin 2. Yeah. I think it's a viable approach for us to do that again. I wouldn't be surprised, although plans can change, that we do exactly that. We just
wouldn't be surprised if, again, they put out a large chunk or a big chunk of the game, maybe the early game or whatever, into early access when they get to that point. And then take feedback and then be able to build off of that feedback and then work on the rest of the game.
Just focus on making a large chunk of content. We go into early access. We see what the players think, if they agree with us. And then we'll move on from there. And then we'll see what
that's really neat. That's really neat.
There's a lot of discovery in the creative process. And we're in pre-production phases. So we don't know yet exactly what we're going to make. We know the general direction.
Yeah.
So they're in pre-production. They don't know exactly what they want to make, but they know the general direction they want to go. They probably know some of the game mechanics and things they want to bring into this. Some of the ideas that they probably had in the back of their heads for 5, 10, 15 years. right? Cinematics was what they brought in. One of the main things they brought in Baldur's Gate 3 that they didn't have in their other games. That was, they'll talk about that later. That was a huge challenge for them. But it would enable them to flesh out not only a player character, but all the characters of the game into so much more detail. What will their next game bring? Now, they haven't said we know exactly what game, what we're doing. But it's certainly interesting. And I hate to be a Larian shill, and I don't want to be accused of that or having a little internet fling here with Swen. But I am so impressed almost every time I hear him speak on the artistic passion, first of all, he has, and the guidance and leadership and the ability to see things with, the money and to see the plan and to just get everybody into the proper slots and working together. He is a master at what he does. And it's quite possible, I mean, it's only history will tell, but it's quite possible that at some point he goes down as one of the most influential people in computer gaming, or at least RPG gaming. I do believe that is a good possibility. We'll see.
There's this trend where a game succeeds and then everyone else kind of is like, we need to make our version of that. And it's been happening for as long as I've been playing games. Everyone wants to kind of create the trend or chase the success of another team, and often it's like there's not a lot of insight into how that process works. For you, what don't you want the industry to take away from the story of Baldur's Gate 3 and the development process of Baldur's Gate 3? What are the red flags that, or the hurdles that you think like, hey, don't want to do this?
You need to make sure you have enough fuel to do it.
I like this.
Probably the biggest one. I mean, like, we had reserve fuel based on the success of the original Sin 2 to engage with this. We upscaled our ambitions when we saw the success in early access.
Right.
So we would have not done that if we would have seen that early access wasn't a success.
That's cool. So if early access was not as successful, they would not have put out the scope of game they did, because they only were focused on the early access and getting it out and seeing what people thought of it. Then beginning to make adjustments as players commented on things, making sure it all worked, and then saying there's still an immense amount of positive feedback. Let's put everything we've got into this. Let's do it. Let's put all our cards in, push all our chips into the middle of the table. Let's take this risk. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done that. It would have been a much simpler game from them, because they would have been more worried that, hey, if it's not going to be super successful, we got to be careful. There's kind of that in there.
Successful. So
Yeah.
I think the most important lesson for us is how important dashboarding is, so you can actually see your fuel meter, so you don't run out of money and you don't get into trouble.
Good idea.
Because it does remain the fuel that you need to make your game. If you do it at the scale that we do it, with the amount of level of permutations, the amount of immersion gameplay, you're going to run into trouble, guaranteed.
Yeah.
So that means that you need to have reserves.
What was it
Backup
like
plans.
as a team to keep having to kind of keep that wind in everyone's sails? Was it difficult, or did everyone just kind of like, no, this is something special, we're going to go for it?
For sure, the latter. I mean, that was from
cool.
the get-go when we started working on Baldur's Gate. I mean, that's also the reason why I picked the project, because I knew there was going to be a lot of passion for it. A lot of people play a lot of D&D, or Baldur's Gate for a lot of them was the first RPG they've ever played, and the first love is always special.
Yeah.
But it took long. 6 years is too long. So
It is.
we tried. We didn't want it to be 6 years.
Really?
But we.
COVID.
I mean, the summation of problems that we had. First, our ambition in blending immersion gameplay with cinematics is very complicated. We had to discover a whole bunch of things. So that delayed. Then we had COVID, obviously. That delayed. We had the war in Ukraine. That delayed. And then we had a bunch of things not working out. That delayed. We had the Stadia problems. That delayed.
Yeah.
The sum of all those things added quite a lot of delay. So by the time we were approaching the end, we were in the funny situation where most teams were finished,
Right.
except for a few teams that weren't finished.
Okay.
Right? So when it came to make the decision, are we going to delay it even further because we were competing with Starfield for the same slot? The interesting bit was the team said, "Fuck no." Pardon my language. So
Fine,
no, we're not going to go later. Even
Right.
hey, I know some of you teams aren't finished. Do you want us to give you more time to finish, and we'll just delay this, and then we'll get away from Starfield by doing that too? The team was like, fuck no. Bethesda, take that as a slap, and it should be a slap because Larian, intentionally or not, slapped you all over the place. And that is truth.
We want it out. I mean, it's ready. It's there. Everything is there. We still have to do a bunch of things, but we want to do these. So the game is out there. It's been long enough. So it's so the fact that it's took so long, that is was not by design. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's better than crunching it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like
it.
for you as a team, like 6 years, you identified as too long. What do you think is the right amount of time for you guys?
I think if we could do something in 4 years, we'll be happy.
Right.
I think we will ambition 3 years, but that only happened once. It was Original Sin 2. That was because it was really very mature, and the changes that we did.
So based on that, I think you can safely say that they would like to have their next game out before the end of 2028. We'll see.
It were smart. This one was a quantum leap. We went from non-cinematics to cinematics. So that's a very high level of energy that you need to put into it. So 3-4 years is, I think, something everybody's comfortable with when you're making an RPG, but it's hard to get that done in that time. So we'll see. We'll see where I end up.
How do you feel about people aspiring to make games like Baldur's Gate 3 now that your game is out there?
Well, I hope somebody makes one so I can play it without knowing the story. For sure. Awesome. I mean, like, I started this company because I wanted to make games that I want to play.
Right.
And like a lot of people joined for that reason. They want to make games that they like to play because we're aligned. So I would like others to make games like that because I would like to play them. And I never play a game when it's finished. So when we finish development, I never play my own games again.
Right.
Because I've played them enough by then.
Yeah.
So I would really like to have a
played it too much by that time.
And get just like the same sense of gameplay.
Are there parts of Baldur's Gate 3 that are still a surprise to you? Where you're like, I did not know that, or are you fairly across all of it and you know every nook and cranny?
I'm not going to say every nook and cranny, but I would dare to say 99%.
Okay. He's played the game a lot.
I was all over it.
A
lot. So tell us about your GDC talk, because you kind of delved into the extensive history of the development, right?
So what I did is I went through our lead meetings from the last 6 years. And our lead meetings is basically a weekly meeting every Wednesday where all of our leads and directors go into a Google Meet room. And we chat about the problems that we're having. So it's by definition a negative document because it's about problems. So it's not about the successes that we're having. But it's a really interesting look at the things, the firefighting that we had to do throughout the entire game. There were certain trends that you could see would get us into trouble. The seeds were already there from the get-go. We just didn't realize it back then, right? So we learned about them. You could see how we mitigated, how we adapted. The team was really, really, really good at adapting to there's a lot of seniority, so they know how to deal with whatever shitstorm comes in their direction. Fascinating, actually. It was fascinating for me. And you know what the most fascinating thing was? It was that we were doing exactly the same mistakes right now as we were starting on a new project, as we did in 2018.
That's funny.
So it was really like, wow, we need to talk about this.
So you have the same tendency just to start a project the same way every time, even if you started it kind of the wrong way last time. Oh, that's interesting.
It was a really good exercise. And so I just basically went through our journey from the get-go, from the very first moment that we talked to Wizards of the Coast, why we did this game, all the way to really an almost a 3-act structure, including the Dark Night of the Soul of the creation of Baldur's Gate 3, because we had quite a journey.
Of those fires, which one really stands out to you as being the one that you're most proud of, and also the one that you were like, damn, I wish that hadn't happened? Are there any of
those? At the same time, like if I really... it has nothing to do with game development. It was getting our team out of Russia when the war started. I mean, like the way that our team ralied to help everybody.
Didn't even know about that.
Like, without,
we just essentially said, like, the moment it started, we said we need to close. We were there for 10 years.
Wow.
We need to get our people out. There was nobody that was in support of this war, so they wanted to all get out. We have people that have relatives and friends in Ukraine. We need to help them. So our entire operations team essentially went into incredible amount of work in terms of relocating, getting passports sorted out, trying to figure out what the
Yeah.
So trying to figure out where everybody was. How do we get it? We had the wife of one of our developers was stuck in Kharkiv, was being bombarded. So how do we get her out?
Yeah.
So there was there was really a lot of panic initially. So because it was a horrible situation. And so you forget about work then, right? So
I was gonna say, how do you continue making a game knowing that you have to? So
you don't.
You guys just stop?
No, I mean.
So I had no idea they had a studio in Russia at the time. I did look this up, and they had one in St. Petersburg, Russia. I go, this is now closed down. So the current studios, if you're interested for Larian Studios, their main headquarters, of course, is in Ghent, Belgium. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Ghent, Belgium. I know Swen Linke is Swen Linke. I think I'm saying that correctly. Is from Belgium. I don't know if Ghent is his home city or not, but I would imagine it probably is. They also have studios in Quebec City, Canada, Dublin, Ireland, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Guildford, United Kingdom, Barcelona, Spain, and Warsaw, Poland. I believe Spain and Poland and Guildford are all the newer studios. I could be wrong on that, though. But yeah.
I mean, like so many people were affected by it. So I guess there was still some development going on, but certainly there were a lot of people involved in trying to sort it out, and that goes very far, because when as a developer or as a person really, if you have to leave your home country and leave everything behind, and you arrive elsewhere,
take care of life first, man.
You've just
life's more important than gaming.
You need to be helped, and so the developers and the teams were so everybody relocated, or almost everybody, to other studios. So we had a deal. I probably shouldn't talk about that, but we managed to get them to a studio where they had a buddy. So we had buddies from the team helping the person that had been uprooted relocate, and so and do that. So it was good to see from a team point of view. It was obviously a horrible situation to start from. So that's the one I think I'm probably the proudest of how the team rallied around it, and that I'm the most regretful about that. That's something like this can still happen.
Yeah. At what point did you start thinking about what's next for the studio?
Before we started.
Wow.
So this was part of a larger plan that I have towards what I call the very big RPG that will dwarf them all.
So Baldur's Gate isn't that RPG.
So his plan for the time he started the studio basically was to build up to the one RPG that will dwarf them all. What does that mean? He's not going to tell us what that means. Not right now. But Baldur's Gate 3 is not that RPG. After all the success of that, they still have more steps to get to their ultimate goal. That's pretty exciting, people. That is pretty exciting.
No.
Wow.
No, not at all. But it's a very long plan, complicated.
So the next game isn't that RPG either. It's another step towards it.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Wow. So the next one that they're working on now is not that RPG that they want, that the one that will dwarf all the others. Now, when he says dwarf, I don't know what that means. Like sell more, be bigger in size, be longer in gameplay. Like, I don't know how they're... And that's just one of those words that they could use and leave everybody kind of in the like, what does that mean? They know what it means, but we don't. But Baldur's Gate 3 was not it. It was a step. This next game they've already begun working on is a step towards it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I think there's some tech that we don't have yet.
Okay. Technology.
I don't know what the specs are going to be in the next gen, but I hope we're going to get something that's going to bring us closer. When it came to BG3, everybody was telling you got to make DLC.
Yeah.
You got to make DLC, and really you should be starting on a sequel. Right? This is so successful, it makes so much money. And so for a while, I was actually, I say, that's what we should be doing. Should change our plans. We should be doing that. And so team actually said, we should be doing that. And then, but then later in the year, I realized, well, that's not what we're made for. I mean, like, that's literally the opposite of what Larian is about. We want to do big new things. We don't want to rehash the thing that we've done already. So that's when we said, we're not going to do that.
And that takes a lot of balls and a lot of confidence to walk away from what would likely be highly successful and highly lucrative and say, nope, that's not what this company's about. We have a goal. And redoing things we've already done is not accomplishing that goal. That is something you've got to stand up and applaud. I mean, that is something you do not see in the gaming industry. And I say stand up and applaud it, whereas if they had made DLC or made a Baldur's Gate 4, I would have been all over that shit. So excited. But I respect them for saying, no, that's not what we're about. That's not what our plan is. That's not what we're going to do.
So we're just back on our original plan, which is going to the next thing,
right?
And then the bigger thing.
What was the distinction between
the next thing and then the bigger thing? So sounds like they hope to do one more game, and if everything works out with the technology and what they want to accomplish, they might be able to get to that bigger thing after.
In DOS and DOS 2 and this, because obviously you say you don't want to do the same thing again, but there was clearly something between those two games.
Okay, so DOS 1 was a game where we finally figured out how to do multiplayer in an RPG environment, and where we had immersion gameplay as the core of the entire game. But the narrative was really not very good. We didn't focus on it.
I agree.
DOS 2, we focused heavily on the narrative.
Right.
We focused heavily on agency, branching storylines, making sure that you could express your identity in the game, and we learned a lot from doing that. With BG3, we brought that identity at the personal level. So the cinematics elevated all of the storytelling. They made sure that it became emotional. It became very, very engaging. We increased the amount of permutations that we put into the game. So we learned how to handle that chaos in very complicated production environment, which is what AAA development is.
I can only imagine.
So for the next thing, you'll see.
What, can you tell us anything about it, or can you
tell us
what it isn't?
Tell us
what it is.
Well, it's not Baldur's Gate 4. It's not Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so
that's amazing. That's good to know. This kind of
no
like,
D&D.
How far ahead have you planned this? Because now that you talk about it in that way, I can see. Each game is like an evolutionary step in the studio's capabilities, more than just how do we make money or like be successful. When did that original plan come up, and how far into the future does it extend? Is there a point where you're like, by this year, that thing that I wanted to achieve should be done?
So this really, I mean, like, so there were two moments. I think the bigger scope of things was during Original Sin 1. So I could see what was not good, but we didn't have the resources to do it. So I started thinking about how can we do it. I signed Baldur's Gate while we were making Original Sin 2, so I didn't know if we were going to be successful.
Interesting.
But I knew that we were going to need something to leverage ourselves upon, because if we were going to go in a more expensive production...
Need some cred and need some finances. They already had cred, but I think they were still working on Divinity Original Sin 2 while they signed to do Baldur's Gate 3, so...
values environment. We needed every single little bit of help that we could in terms of getting widespread attention, because we would need to sell more units to be able to pay for the development.
That's a good way of doing it.
So it was really during Original Sin 1. Before that, we were just struggling to survive. Right. So we just went from game to game and really often fucking up. But that's game development is messy. I mean, we're always very ambitious, never about profit. Always went to the point that we didn't have any money anymore when we made our games, even here with BG3. So it's
spend all the cash available.
It really is about like just trying to make something really good. That you want to play, and I talked about that. I briefly talked about it. When I make a game, what I'm looking for is the thing that made me fall in love with games. Is that special moment of elation? Right. You know, like it's gonna be good. You know, and it's rare. But when you have it, you're really happy, and that's the bit that I'm trying to get into our games. And with BG3, for a long time, I had that feeling like when everything was going to fall into place, but I could see it. I said, I'm really happy. And I kept on, it was a mistake, by the way, that I made, because I kept on telling the team it's going to be so cool. I love this. And as a result of that, they didn't see the errors anymore, because they thought it was cool. And I actually had a developer tell me, like, I said, what did I do wrong? You weren't making noise. I said, what do you mean? You were saying it was cool. I said, well, you could see it wasn't finished.
Right, that's an interesting conundrum.
Like, that was, and it was really weird, because I was really positive about the game, and they wanted me to be negative about it, so they knew what to fix.
It's hilarious.
It was really funny.
Yeah, that's interesting. How far ahead do you reckon? Is it a 10-year plan? Is it a 20-year plan?
I have a general sense of what I want to achieve. So, I mean, like, it'll adapt to circumstances, to technology, to Larian's situation, because I don't know where we are going to be X years from now, so it's very hard.
Everyone right now is like games. Making games it's the worst time to be making games. Do you think it is the worst time to be making games? And is there a concern that things might not be able to accommodate the vision that you have in the future, given the path we're on now?
Good question.
It's a really difficult question to answer because I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, obviously right now there are a lot of people losing their jobs, so that's it's very upsetting, especially when it happens to you. For us, I had the equivalent in the sense like when publishers cut the money stream and I didn't have anything coming in anymore. It's a similar feeling. So we were very often very touch and go. So I don't wish that upon anybody. At the same time, you saw this happen before, specifically in 2009, which was one of our darkest days. When you had the economic crisis, the business model had changed also, because people were making lots of derivative work. Like there were 500 versions of My Little Pony that were being printed.
I played 499
and millions of units were being sent out. At some point, just people didn't buy it anymore. All those cartridges came in. It caused disaster among the publishers at the time. Who were just chasing the same thing over and over. So very similar to... And so what happened there then, however, was that it was very dark days. Lots of people lost their jobs. But then it created opportunities for plenty of other people. So you saw a whole bunch of studios that actually rose in the same period or I think you're going to see quite a lot of new studios form. Out of that, you will see a lot of gameplay. They will create job opportunities. People will land again. All the experience is very valuable. So I don't think people sometimes realize how much a company loses when somebody goes away. Because it's just the training, the onboarding, the tribal knowledge that is really, really valuable. When I see the people that are getting fired today, I'm saying that it's impossible. Like I talked about this, Wizards of the Coast, they had a really large layoff. There's nobody left from my original room with whom we were making, and you worked with those people, and you said there's so much knowledge about D&D here, and that's gone. It's just gone. So
a good thing.
So that's I'm not judging in any way, but it is. You can see that knowledge is out there.
The final question I want to ask is, you've mentioned a bunch of times that you were basically, almost broke, done, and you have bounced back. What is the kind of mentality of the studio now? Do you still, I imagine, like having been through that so many times, you'd probably have the fear of that constantly being there. Are you past that point now where you're confident, you're like, we're good, we're going to be fine no matter what happens because of the successes? Or do you still have that this could fall apart at any moment mentality?
No. So what you learn is to have fallback positions. So as we progressed, as the studio has been growing, I've been increasing our fallback positions. So if something goes wrong, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And if that goes wrong, I know exactly what we're going to do.
Very smart, man.
So that was very much built in. And was also the reason why I knew when we took on Baldur's Gate 3, okay, we're going to be fine. But it remains really, really important. I can't stress it enough to have the dashboarding to see where you are. Like if you're going to travel across the North Pole with your car, you need to know how much fuel you have in your car, or you're going to freeze to death. Right. So that's the really important bit. It's knowing what you're doing.
Good tires help
which
too.
is sometimes really complicated in something as messy as game development. So people should not underestimate the importance of the production departments that give you that dashboard reading.
Take it from someone who's made a very big game that is very successful. Actual final question. What are you playing now? What are you excited about playing? I always ask that question to developers because it's like we've shut ourselves in a room for 4 years to make this game. You've been gone for 6 years. I'm sure you played some games, but what are the games that excite you currently, either during the process of making development or now?
So I've been playing Balatro a lot. Balatro is fantastic. If you're not playing Balatro, play Balatro.
Coming to phones soon, which is a dangerous thing.
I've been playing discovering Vampire Survivors.
Oh, nice.
I hadn't played it yet, so I went on a holiday and I was playing Vampire Survivors the entire time.
It's fantastic.
And we're trying to convince them to do something with Baldur's Gate because there's a Vampire Survivors. So that should be cool. I've been trying to. I bought a Lenovo Legion with the intention of installing Alan Wake 2 on it because I still haven't played it. But I got region locked.
Oh, damn!
So I was in Quebec, and so I'm from Belgium, so I need to go back.
Oh no!
It was a really weird time. It was a credit card thing, but so that's the one I want to play next. And then Dragon's Dogma 2, which is coming out
very soon. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like this week, right?
Yeah.
It's Friday. So that one, that is definitely also on my list.
Yeah, those Alan Wake 2, I can say for certain you're gonna have a wonderful time with, because it is fantastic. But Sven, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you coming and giving us some insight into how you make games, and hope you have a great rest of GDC.
Thank you very much.
Hey everyone.
All right, so now we're going to take a look, jump right from there into this here article from IGN.com. This is on Baldur's Gate 3, and it says Larian started work on Baldur's Gate 3 DLC, then canceled it, and the studio was elated. Wasn't really coming from the heart, says director Swen Vincke. This is by Kat Bailey, posted March 21st, updated March 25th. All right, let's get into this. He has a little more detail into this part of it. So during a talk at GDC 2024, Baldur's Gate 3 director Swen Vincke announced that Larian Studios would not be making any DLC, expansions, or sequels for the highly regarded RPG, which took home another Game of the Year award at Wednesday's Game Developers' Choice Awards. However, speaking with IGN, Vincke did say that Larian began work on DLC, and even gave some thought to a potential Baldur's Gate 4 before pivoting away to other projects. Because of all the success, the obvious thing would have been to do a DLC, so we started on one. We started even thinking about BG4, Vincke said. But we hadn't really had closure on BG3 yet, and just to jump forward on something new felt wrong. We'd also spent a whole bunch of time converting the system into a video game, and we wanted to do new things. There are a lot of constraints on making D&D, and 5th edition is not an easy system to put into a video game. We had all these ideas of new combat we wanted to try out, and they were not compatible. That's something to keep an eye on. As far as their games going forward, we had all of these ideas of new combat we wanted to try out, and they were not compatible. So thinking about things, as I said, with Larian Studios, where they would take like Divinity Original Sin and they'd move that over and then add something to it, game mechanic wise, and make it a Divinity Original Sin 2. And then they take all of that over and add more game mechanics to it and make a Baldur's Gate 3. Imagine taking what they've learned from Baldur's Gate 3, obviously cutting out the Dungeons and Dragons stuff, flipping it over to the next game, and adding new combat, and making it into whatever their next project is. That's possibly one of the main things they might want to add to a game. New combat. All these ideas of new combat we wanted to try out. And they were not compatible with D&D 5th edition. So interesting. Vincke has spoken before about the challenges about working with 5th edition, particularly when it comes to how powerful players get when they reach level 12 and beyond. Shortly after release, Larian Studios said that the team wanted to do new content, but didn't know what yet. To date, Larian Studios has mostly focused on adding content that wasn't available at release, such as the new epilogue and additional endings. When it came time to make DLC, though, Vincke says Larian was going through the motions. You could see the team was doing it because everyone felt like we had to do it, but it wasn't really coming from the heart. And we're very much a studio from the heart. It's what's gotten us into misery, and it's also been the reasons for our success. That's an awesome quote. Again, the man thinks gaming industry and life very, 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 very well. And he explains things in such excellent ways. You could see the team was doing it because everyone felt like we had to do it, but it wasn't really coming from the heart. And we're very much a studio from the heart. It's what's gotten us into misery, and it's also been the reasons for our success. If I had to answer this, would you have wanted Larian Studios to complete Baldur's Gate 3 DLC? The answer is probably yes, I would have wanted them to. But I'm fine with them walking away as well. Vincke says that he took a vacation over the Christmas holidays, and when he returned, his mind was made up. I came back and I told the team, we're not going to do it. we're going to shift around and we're going to start doing these other things that we talked about that we planned on doing before we started up Baldur's Gate 3. Interesting. Those were always the plans for afterward. Here it is. Here we go. We have 2 games that we want to make, and we have lots of concepts. 2 games. Their ultimate plan is 2 more games. So let's just have closure of Baldur's Gate 3. It's been great. We've done our job. It's a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Let's pass the torch to another studio to pick up this incredible legacy. Interesting. So I guess that means part of what they signed on for in order to do Baldur's Gate 3 is when they walked away from it, somebody else can go mess with it. Another studio. Interesting. Asked how the studio responded, Vincke said the team was elated. I thought they were going to be angry at me because I couldn't muster the energy. I saw so many elated faces, which I didn't expect, and I could tell they shared the same feelings. So we were all aligned with one another. And I've had so many developers come to me after and say, thank God, Vincke says. And can you just imagine having spent 6 years working on a game, being so successful with it, being so happy over it, and then hearing, now we got to do DLC and a sequel. And you're like, that's great, but this is not part of our original plan, and this is not our own thing. We were hired to do this. I'm always the one where it starts with the initial idea, and then I give it to the team, and they start iterating it, and they turn it into something much better. During Baldur's Gate 3, I pitched to them what the next game would be. If I see they're excited, I'll say, okay, let's do that. If they're not, it's back to the drawing board. So they were very excited about a couple of the things we were planning on doing. And the pivot to start doing Baldur's Gate 3 DLC was expected because it's what you do. We didn't have any antagonism towards against Baldur's Gate 4 or DLC, but the heart wasn't there. It was more routine work than actually being excited. Now we have the excitement back in the room, and that's a big important thing. So when asked if the next game would be Divinity Original Sin 3, Vincke could neither confirm nor deny. Interesting. He did, however, say it will be, quote, different than what you think it is, unquote, but that it's, quote, still familiar, unquote. So I think it might be set in that same basic world, but maybe in a different time. Who knows? Elsewhere, Vincke said that the new project will dwarf the scope of Baldur's Gate 3, which would be quite impressive given the scope of that game. In the meantime, Vincke has confirmed that Larian Studios is still working on more content for Baldur's Gate 3, including cross-platform mod support. After that, though, the future of Asterion, Karlach, and the rest of Baldur's Gate 3's now beloved characters will be in the hands of Wizards of the Coast. One way or another, Baldur's Gate 3 leaves behind an impressive legacy. We gave it a perfect 10 in our original review, and it is largely swept awards season. Even if you finished it, there's still plenty more to see, so make sure to check out our complete Baldur's Gate 3 walkthrough. As for Vincke, he reckons he's figured out Act 1 for his next game, which would also be the act that probably goes into early access at some point. But if it's anything like the development of Baldur's Gate 3, which took some 6 years to complete, it may be a while before we get to play it. And there we go. That is my fascinating look at the gaming industry through the eyes of Larian's director, Swen Vincke. And he talked about all kinds of things that some of I've never heard a game studio director talk about before, and in new and exciting ways to me. I hope you all got something out of that. There's a lot to process. There's a lot to get excited about. There's a lot to be sad about as well. There's all kinds of emotional content to this. Get in there, the comments, and express it, people. I do appreciate when you jump in and you make this a living conversation. I think that's excellent. Don't forget to wow, what are you doing? Thank you. Wow, that was not working at all. I just upgraded my OBS, and it seems to be really screwed up right now. Hopefully, we're still recording. Okay, good. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and jump into the conversation and forward this to your friends on a playlist from Spotify. No, all that good stuff. Yeah, like subscribing, like liking, and like commenting. Yes. Also, watching is great too. If you watch us, I do appreciate it. Everybody from Miss Valley Entertainment News, my name is Dread. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.